Oliver, I'm struck by the repetition of the key theme throughout the morning so far of the importance of improving efficiency, improving productivity, of improving innovation. And I did wonder just how willing the commercial banks such as yours are to fund innovation. If your focus is on actual real profit margins today, where does the rather woolly prospect of potential future opportunity fit into those calculations?
I think it's really important for, Tom's touched on it already, it's important for the industry to sort of band together. Where we struggle is where we have huge amounts of unproven technology. We're quite, with a small c, we're quite a conservative bank. Most high street banks are. Are we going to start funding huge amounts of innovation? If you'd have come to a bank 20 years ago and said, I want to put in some robotic milkers, you might have got quite a short answer. Whereas now, obviously we know they're proven, we know we can see increase in milk yield. There is a problem in between the innovation and actually getting it onto the mainstream market, and indeed, it's something we're looking at. But then there's a whole space there with crowdfunding, and we've seen the investment in innovation across the industry.
That's the obvious next question. If not you, then who?
I think it has to be for individual businesses to pick that up. As soon as we can, basically, if we look at a lending proposition and someone says, if I put this in, this will save my business this much. If it can be proven, we'll look at funding it. It's where we have really unproven technology.
Tom, where is the funding for innovation for individual agribusiness going to come from?
I think that it's worth, again, drawing attention to the agri-tech strategy. So the Catalyst Fund in particular over the last few years has been an invaluable source for individual and collaborative projects across the food industry to draw down government funding to support investment in innovation and R&D. I think there will be a growing onus on the private sector, particularly if we look at the funding model for the agri-tech centres in the future, to play its part. But I appreciate, as somebody who's worked in the private sector, that you've got to see a return on investment and a return on capital for what you do, and that suggests to me that the public sector will always play a really important role, particularly where there is market failure, because there isn't necessarily the incentive from a business point of view to make that investment. There perhaps is a question about when we look at the future UK farm policy, and I'm speaking a little bit from the hip here about the extent to which lending to businesses for innovation could be underpinned by some kind of loan guarantee or underpinning financial mechanism. I know there's been some talk about the role that the European Investment Bank plays already in doing that. There might be some discussion that takes place in a policy context about whether a future British or English agricultural policy could help small businesses, farmers in particular, access funding through those kind of instruments to innovate. And there may also be something in a kind of challenge fund, whether that provides the kind of opportunity as well. But my message, I guess, to the industry in particular, the organisations involved in the policy making, is think creatively and think about the kind of interventions that will help businesses really get stuck into boosting up their investment. I mean, I don't show the figures here, and it's something we need to drill down into. But looking at the relative investment levels in British agriculture, are they helping to ultimately improve the performance? Again, if we're seeing an increase in lending every year, it's not driving the long-term performance in the industry as much as it needs to.
I just wonder, Oliver, whether you're being a bit too cautious, whether you should have a greater appetite for risk.
I think a greater appetite for risk is what got banks into problems in the first place, wasn't it?
Yes, this is partly why I'm asking. There was no shortage of this appetite in other sectors.
There isn't, yeah, and I suppose in some ways you could argue, going back to the example of a sort of what banking terms would be a debenture lend against a contract to supply. Perhaps the agricultural sectors of bank have got a little bit risk averse. I can assure you from our side of the table, it's something we're pushing for more and more, because at the end of the day, as you saw from the figures, for every £1 in credit, we're £3 borrowing. It's a debt industry, and as a bank, that's where we make our money.
Still looking out for your questions if you want to join in the discussion. There's a hand right here at the front from our Chief Executive.
Yes. Thank you very much. Tom, I noticed you had a comment right at the bottom of your list of funders of private sources. It's a very sensitive subject, asking our members how much they spend on near-term R&D. We last did it over 3 years ago. We're about to ask it again, but I can tell you, even 3 years ago, it was topside of £50 million, which actually put us in number 2 after BBSRC. And I would be quite confident that we're significantly north of that now. So our members don't like to talk about it collectively because it's part of their inherent strategies, but you know, AIC members are really putting their money where their mouth is on this.
Okay, thank you. Time for questions still. There's a hand towards the middle of the room there. Just tell us who you are when the microphone reaches you. It's right behind you.
Thank you. Stephen Tompkins from NIAB. We've talked about skills development this morning and how agriculture lags behind other industries in the amount of people who are trained and think about professional development. How do you think that we can get the sector to think more about that and do more about it and get more competitive in skills and training?
Okay, thank you, Tom. How to boost the level of the amount of training and the level of skills?
I mean, there's a supply and demand challenge here. From the supply side, it's important that we do a more systematic look at whether there are gaps in terms of the provision of the kind of skills that businesses will need. My sense is actually in the technical space, probably not. There's no shortage of farm business consultants, of agronomists, of nutritionists and others who've got absolutely invaluable expertise and knowledge that farmers should be using. There may be something in terms of resilience and looking at farm business management over a 5-year cycle as opposed to on an annual basis. And I think there may be something around leadership as well. There are a couple of platforms out there like the Worshipful Company of Farmers and others. But when I look into the future and I look at how businesses will be structured with, I guess, a bit of a separation between land and farming businesses being bigger and more vertically integrated themselves, they're going to need those skills to be able to harness fully the capability of the technical talent they've got in their businesses to really succeed. There might be a little bit in the supply equation as well about the agricultural colleges, and I think the advent of the National Land-Based College is an important development in all of that, because it for the first time creates a forum to coordinate with all of the land-based colleges to ensure that they're providing the students that are coming out of those colleges are equipped with the kind of skills that businesses into the future are going to need, not businesses that 10, 15 years ago needed. And I think, again, we play a really important part of that platform. The demand side of the equation is really tough, and I don't know myself what it takes to drive that. Clearly, in some sectors, it's working because they're going out there and they're hungry for the information and advice. And when we do our survey of our levy payers, as we do on an annual basis, that tells us in areas like potatoes and like cereals, the agronomist is absolutely pivotal to the decisions that they make, and it's important that we harness those relationships and don't try to duplicate them. But in some sectors like beef and sheep, I can tell you it's not only a minority, it's a very, very significant minority that would actually actively go out there. And that may be partly about trying to drive the demand through encouragement, but I think a lot of it's going to come back to talking up the need for a much more competitive industry and not looking for excuses for somebody else to do it.
And Oliver, given the importance that you ascribe to the management within the business on that Campari slide of yours, this is also a key factor for you.
It is. It's a huge factor. Obviously, from Tom's side of the equation, it's all about technical efficiencies, which from our side of the equation drive financial efficiencies. Obviously, the dairy sector has seen some really low prices in the last 2 years, and there was an industry-wide initiative called Decisions for Dairy, which was led by AHDB Dairy. suppose my frustration, and I've been, I was brought up on a farm, I've managed farms, I've done business consultancy to farming, I've lent money, and now I have this job. I've seen many different sizes, is the lack of engagement of people within the industry, farmers themselves. We offered, through Decisions for Dairy, over the 2 days of livestock, we offered as many slots as people wanted to talk about their banking requirements, their business management. Promar International were involved. When you think where the milk price has been for the last 18 months, we had the grand total of 3 appointments. The industry has to engage with it as well, and through that enthusiasm, hopefully, as you say, with engagement with the land-based colleges, it'll actually enthuse young people to come into the industry, because it's not this sort of sleepy sector where it's leaning on a gate waiting for a crop to grow or a lamb to grow. It's actually a really highly technical, fascinating, fast-moving industry.
What about leadership skills and training to improve those?
I think for me, possibly, the focus initially should be on individual business management skills. Leadership skills are great, but actually some of the industry leaders we see who farm at home, run excellent businesses, but actually focusing on the day-to-day business management of a business, the decisions that make the difference in the bank account is actually what drives. Businesses have many different, passing on to the next generation, being involved in the local community. But actually, if you don't generate cash, you haven't got a business.
Okay. Looking for a few more questions if we have them. There's a hand here towards the front of the room. If you could just keep your hand in the air, ma'am, until we get the microphone to you. And there it is.
My name is Belinda Clark. I'm Director of Agritech East. And I'd like to respond to Declan's challenge about if the banks aren't going to fund this so-called kind of valley of death between R&D and market adoption, who will? And this is going to sound like a plug, but I promise you it's not my scheme. The Local Enterprise Partnership in this very geography, actually, Greater Cambridge, Greater Peterborough and New Anglia, have pioneered a scheme, an Agritech growth and R&D grant investment scheme. So I guess I would just say to everybody, if you're in this geography, and you're an SME, you could be eligible to get this grant. And if you're not in this geography, I would strongly recommend some serious lobbying to your local enterprise partnerships, because the growth deal bids are being developed all the time. There's always discussions going on. And this scheme has proved to be really impactful for a number of businesses wanting to undertake and implement R&D.
Okay, thank you for that very helpful and useful observation. Questions for our experts here to your right? Just put your hand up and we'll involve you in the discussion if there's a hand just there.
Hiya, I'm Claire James, a student at Harper Adams. I'm just wondering if the bank is going far enough to encourage youngsters into the industry.
Any business is exceedingly difficult, and if agriculture, new entrants is always held up as being really tough to get into, and I can understand that. I think the industry as a whole needs to do far more to help, but actually, if you walked into your local Barclays branch on Peterborough High Street and said, "Hi, I've got 4,000 quid, I want to buy a shop and be a cobbler, I'll need about 120,000 quid," the answer's probably going to be no. Agriculture isn't a special case. There are ways for young people to get into agriculture. There is also more to our industry, as everybody in this room can attest to, than actually getting your hands dirty and milking cows or driving a combine. I grew up on a pig farm. I'll be really honest, my boss isn't listening. I didn't aspire to work for a bank when I was 19, 20, 21. But I'm actually doing that, and I'm still involved in the agricultural industry. I think my advice to someone who, students at Harper or whichever agricultural college, I better give Myesco a mention, or they'll never forgive me, which is where I went, is to actually try and build up that CV. And when you're getting into agriculture and farm management, don't just be the herdsman or the agronomist on the farm. Actually get involved in the day-to-day business management decisions. And that way, when you come to the bank, you can demonstrate that track record that obviously an established 2 or 3 generation farming business can. But there is no difference with buying a farm or buying some land and buying a huge shop on the high street in Peterborough or Birmingham or wherever you choose to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions as well. Please join me in showing our appreciation to our contributors, Oliver McIntyre and Tom Brown. Thank you very much.